Welcome to this brief video on how to provide feedback to learners more effectively. To make sure we're thinking of the best context for improving our feedback to learners, let's briefly consider how feedback is different from evaluations or advice. Evaluations tend to be judgments as to whether performance meets a particular standard. Those judgments do provide a type of feedback as to adequacy, and the evaluator may include some specifics that would qualify as feedback. Many times, however, evaluations occur at the end of an experience, which does not allow learners an opportunity to alter their behavior to attempt improvement and then to receive feedback on those attempts to change. In contrast, when we think of feedback, the focus tends to be on providing information about the recipient's behavior that they can then use to alter their behavior if they so choose, and ideally in a time frame where there's an opportunity to incorporate the feedback into successive attempts at the behavior. As we unpack what feedback is, we can see how feedback is not the same as advice, which tends to be instructive as to what you believe the learner should do differently. There's nothing inherently wrong with evaluations and advice, and they each play important roles in education. However, feedback plays its own special role. The point here is that if we wish to improve our feedback to learners, we need to be clear in our own minds about what it consists of and what its goals are. Now let's consider the core elements of effective feedback. First, good feedback is specific in that the learner knows what behaviors are being discussed. If it's positive feedback, the learner knows which specific behaviors to continue or to do more of. If it's critical feedback, it's clear which behaviors to avoid or alter. Second, good feedback is delivered as soon as possible, which aids in both understanding which specific behaviors are being focused on and being able to correct the behavior in time for subsequent attempts. It's easy to put off providing critical feedback by rationalizing that the behavior will probably improve or it wasn't really that big of a deal. However, allowing it to continue does not do the learner any favors, and if you do eventually provide that critical feedback, the recipient might rightfully question, "Why didn't you bring it up sooner?" and then feel resentment as a result. Third, good feedback is credible so that the learner takes the feedback seriously. There are several components to establishing credibility. The learner has to believe that you are being objective in your feedback about performance. Also, that you have accurate knowledge of their performance, which requires you observing their behavior and understanding the context in which it occurs. Credibility is also based on judgment that you, the feedback provider, performs the behaviors you're trying to promote in the learner. Otherwise, the feedback can be dismissed as hypocrisy. Fourth, good feedback is collaborative in that it's based on a dialogue rather than a monologue. After all, we're talking about the learner's behavior, and ultimately they are the one who will or will not benefit from the feedback. So it's at least as much about how the feedback is received as it is about how the feedback is given. You may have the best of intentions in providing feedback, but if it's not received that way, it's unlikely to be effective. And last, good feedback occurs in the context of a good educational relationship. If the learner believes that you have their best interest at heart, that you care about their education and their personal improvement, even critical feedback will likely land well and be appreciated. Without that supportive relationship context, it's easy for their learner to become defensive or resistant to critical feedback and discount whatever feedback is provided, whether positive or negative. Do you personally follow a specific format or structure when you provide feedback to learners in the clinical setting? Why or why not? You may have concerns that a format will not apply to most or all situations, or that it stifles spontaneity. On the positive side, however, a tried and true structure promotes consistency and helps learners anticipate what feedback will look like and how to use it. Let's consider the one format that has been studied and proven to work well. This evidence-based model starts with asking the learner for self-assessment, followed by sharing your assessment, and then ending with collaboration as to possible next steps. One advantage of this method is that it's less likely than others to elicit defensiveness, as well as the tendency to discount the feedback. It also strengthens the relationship between teacher and learner, as the format communicates a basic respect for the learner's perspective and autonomy as to their own professional development. Before we wrap up, let's consider a few black belt moves as a feedback provider. The first is the notion that providing critical feedback effectively does not come easily or naturally, so there is great value in mentally rehearsing how to communicate such feedback and anticipating possible reactions and how to handle each. And by the way, learners frequently report not having received feedback, or at least not enough of it, despite teachers feeling confident that much feedback was given. So one solution is to use the word feedback frequently or have designated times in the day that are labeled feedback sessions. Another black belt move is to address explicitly the learner's emotions related to receiving critical feedback. It's not that you have to be able to make the learner feel better about the sting from critical feedback, but simply acknowledging that it does sting will go a long way in helping the learner lower their defenses that naturally arise when experiencing a blow to the ego. Also, it can be powerful for the learner if you can share a personal story about having been on the receiving end of critical feedback and how you handled it. The last black belt move is to lead by example. That is, do you role model what it looks like to be someone who actively seeks feedback, is grateful for it, and reacts without defensiveness? One way to do that is to ask for feedback on how you provide feedback. Because it may be difficult for the learner to be candid given the power differential inherent in the roles, you might choose to start by sharing your perspective on what you're concerned about with regard to your feedback provision, or the ways that you think you could do a better job. That opens the door for the learner to respond to your self-assessment rather than having to risk saying something that may not be well received. As we bring this video to a close, here's a recap of the topics we covered. The primary question is, what do you plan to do differently as a result of your investment in viewing this video? Reflecting on that question and generating some specific actionable response is a necessary first step toward improvement. It's unfortunately common to turn our attention from a training such as this and fall back into our usual work routines, having lost out on any possible benefits from our investment. Last, how will you remember to enact your intended changes? The answer has to be tailored to your unique situation, but forming it now helps ensure that your investment in this process pays dividends indefinitely. If you would like any personalized support on this topic or anything else related to your role as an educator, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.